The realization that mental clarity can actually deepen with age rather than inevitably crumble creates a profound shift in how the future is viewed. Most people operate under the mistaken assumption that the brain is a machine destined to rust, accepting moments of forgetfulness or confusion as the unavoidable tax of living past 70. This fatalistic view becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, leading to stagnation, withdrawal, and the very decline they fear. However, the perspective offered by Heng suggests that the mind is not a static vessel, but a dynamic stream, capable of clearing its own sediment if the water is kept flowing. By integrating the physical discipline of the body with the intentional stillness of the mind, it is possible to construct a memory that is not only reliable, but sharper and more resilient than in youth. This journey does not require complex technology or medication, but rather a return to fundamental principles of alignment, breath, and a removal of internal hindrances. Restoring the flow of vitality through the body, the foundation of a sharp memory, according to the principles of self-cultivation derived from Heng's teachings, begins not in the brain, but in the physical vessel that houses it. A common misconception in the West is that memory is purely a cerebral activity detached from the neck down. In reality, the brain consumes a massive amount of the body's energy and relies entirely on the smooth circulation of blood and oxygen to maintain the neural connections required for recall and cognition. When the body becomes sedentary, a state that often creeps in unnoticed during the later decades of life, the internal flow, often described as qi or simply vitality, stagnates. This stagnation manifests as brain fog, lethargy, and a slowness in retrieving information. The first step to rebuilding memory is therefore to re-engage the body in a way that cultivates energy rather than depleting it. It is about generating a gentle, persistent internal heat that burns away the sluggishness of the system. Movements that support this cognitive revival are rarely about high-intensity cardiovascular strain, which can sometimes deplete the reserves of an older practitioner. Instead, the focus is on coordination, balance, and deep, rhythmic breathing. When an individual engages in slow, deliberate practices such as qigong or simple mindful stretching, they're doing more than lubricating joints. They're forcing the brain to reconnect with the periphery of the body. This act of proprioception, knowing where the body is in space, fires up vast networks in the brain that are often allowed to go dormant. By synchronizing the breath with movement, the practitioner floods the bloodstream with oxygen, directly nourishing the hippocampus, the region of the brain most critical for forming new memories. The breath acts as the bridge between the conscious mind and the autonomic nervous system, shifting the state from a stress-induced fight or flight mode, which inhibits memory, to a rest and digest mode, where repair and consolidation occur. There is a profound simplicity in this approach that often frustrates the modern desire for a quick, complex fix. The individual may feel that standing still or moving slowly is doing nothing, yet it is in this subtle cultivation that the most significant neurological repairs take place. It is acknowledged that finding the patience for such slowness is difficult in a world addicted to speed, but this patience is the very fuel the brain requires. A practical scenario illustrates this potential. Consider the morning routine of a person committed to this path. Instead of immediately consuming news or coffee, they spend 20 minutes in a state of moving meditation, perhaps performing the Ba Duan Jin or simply stretching with total awareness. During this time, they do not think about the day's to-do list, but focus entirely on the sensation of air entering the lungs and the feeling of the feet rooting into the ground. This single act primes the brain for the day, clearing the cortisol that accumulated during sleep and setting a baseline of alertness that caffeine cannot replicate. However, it is crucial to understand that physical movement alone is not a magic cure if the underlying structure is damaged beyond repair. There are limitations to what improved circulation can do in the face of advanced neurodegenerative diseases that have already destroyed significant tissue. Yet, even in such cases, the quality of life and the remaining cognitive function can be optimized. The goal is not to reverse time, but to maximize the potential of the present moment. The practice acknowledges that the body changes and the intensity must be adjusted, but the principle remains constant. A stagnant pond breeds algae and obscurity, while a flowing river remains clear. The practitioner learns to listen to the body's signals, distinguishing between the pain of injury, which requires rest, and the discomfort of rust, which requires gentle movement to break free. The mechanism at play here involves the regulation of inflammation, a key driver of cognitive decline. Chronic, low-grade inflammation in the body often translates to inflammation in the brain, leading to the deterioration of synapses. By engaging in regular, low-impact movement that reduces stress hormones, the individual systematically lowers this inflammatory load. This creates a biological environment where neurons can thrive rather than just survive. It is a form of internal hygiene, sweeping away the metabolic waste products that cloud thinking. Heng often speaks of removing the dust from the mirror. In this context, the physical circulation is the cloth that wipes the mirror clean. Without this physical basis, any mental technique is like trying to run high-performance software on hardware that is overheating and dusty. The body must support the mind, and the mind must lead the body, creating a unified entity capable of sharpness and reliability. The application of this principle extends beyond formal exercise sessions and into the way one moves through the entire day. It involves maintaining an upright posture that facilitates full breathing rather than collapsing the chest and restricting oxygen flow. It involves walking with intention, feeling the ground, rather than shuffling unconsciously. These micro habits of physical awareness keep the brain engaged in the reality of the present moment, which is the only place where memory can be encoded. If the mind is absent from the body during the walk to the kitchen, it is no surprise that the individual forgets why they went there. By anchoring the awareness in the physical form, the practitioner creates a continuous thread of presence that drastically reduces the frequency of these lapses. The physical vitality becomes the reservoir from which the memory draws its strength. What physical sensation am I ignoring that is trying to tell me to move? Clearing the 5 hindrances to sharpen focus. Once the physical vessel is revitalized, the challenge shifts to the content of the mind itself. Heng teaches that the mind is often clouded not by a lack of capacity, but by the presence of hindrances, specifically the 5 hindrances of desire, ill will, sloth, restlessness, and doubt. In the context of memory for those over 70, these hindrances manifest as the mental clutter that prevents new information from sticking. A sharp memory relies heavily on the ability to pay attention. One cannot remember what one never truly noticed. The modern senior is often bombarded with just as much information as a younger person, but without the filter of a disciplined mind. This information becomes a chaotic noise that overwhelms the cognitive processing centers. To build a reliable memory, the individual must learn to recognize and remove these mental blocks, treating the attention span as a precious resource that must be guarded. The mechanism of attention in the aging brain is often less effective at filtering out irrelevant stimuli. This is where the hindrance of restlessness often wreaks havoc. The mind jumps from a worry about health to a news headline, then to a memory of the past, and back to a task at hand. This constant switching prevents the brain from entering the deeper states of concentration required to encode long-term memories. When the mind is restless, the right function of the memory is interrupted. Heng emphasizes the power of intention or will to cut through this noise. By consciously practicing the removal of these distractions, the individual strengthens the prefrontal cortex's executive control. It is akin to training a muscle. Every time the mind wanders to a worry and is gently brought back to the present task, the neural circuitry for focus is reinforced. A powerful applied insight in this domain is the practice of doing one thing at a time. This sounds deceptively simple, yet it is the antidote to the hindrance of sensory overload. Consider the scenario of placing keys on a table. Usually, this action is done while thinking about the groceries, the dog, or the phone ringing. The memory of placing the keys is never formed because the mind was never there. The corrective practice involves stopping, looking at the hand placing the keys, feeling the metal against the wood, and mentally acknowledging, I am placing the keys here. This 3-second pause engages multiple senses and anchors the moment in time. It is not that the memory failed. It is that the attention was never applied. By systematically applying this level of presence to small tasks, the practitioner begins to clear the fog of automaticity that plagues daily life. There is a significant emotional component to these hindrances as well, particularly doubt. Many people over 70 begin to doubt their own faculties, interpreting every minor lapse as a sign of irreversible decline. This doubt generates anxiety, which further scrambles the brain's ability to recall information, creating a vicious cycle. The teachings suggest observing this doubt without identifying with it. It is just a cloud passing across the sky. It is not the sky itself. When the individual stops fighting the memory lapse and instead relaxes, the information often surfaces on its own. The tension caused by the hindrance of doubt is often the very wall blocking the memory. Learning to relax into the effort of remembering, rather than straining against it, preserves the mental energy needed for the task. The limitations of this mental discipline must be acknowledged. It requires consistent effort and is not a passive fix. For an individual with a history of multitasking and high-stress living, slowing down to focus on one thing can feel excruciatingly boring or inefficient. The mind will rebel, seeking the stimulation of chaos. Furthermore, in cases of clinical attention deficits or advanced cognitive impairment, the ability to self-regulate may be compromised. However, even in these situations, the external environment can be structured to reduce hindrances, simplifying the living space, reducing background noise, and creating routines that require less active decision-making. The principle remains the validation of the present moment as the only moment that matters. Ultimately, mastering the monkey mind is about reclaiming the sovereignty of one's own consciousness. It is deciding that the internal space is a sanctuary that is not to be violated by useless worry or irrelevant distraction. When the water of the mind is turbulent, it cannot reflect the moon. When the mind is still, the reflection is perfect. Memory is simply the reflection of what has been clearly perceived. By clearing the sediment of the 5 hindrances, the practitioner allows the natural clarity of the mind to surface. This does not mean the mind becomes empty, but rather that it becomes spacious, able to hold information without grasping or confusion. It transforms the memory from a frantic search through a junk drawer into a calm retrieval from an organized library. Where does my mind go when I'm trying to listen? The nutrition of simplicity and the power of rest, the sustenance of a sharp memory, extends beyond mental exercises and physical movement into the tangible realm of what is consumed and how the system is allowed to recover. In the philosophy embodied by Heng, the body is a temple that requires pure fuel and adequate periods of emptiness to function optimally. For the aging brain, the metabolic efficiency decreases, meaning it becomes less tolerant of junk, both in terms of food and sensory input. The modern diet, often laden with sugar and processed inflammatory agents, creates a biological fog that directly antagonizes the clarity needed for memory. The digestive system and the brain are intimately connected. A heavy, burdened gut leads to a heavy, burdened mind. Therefore, the strategy for longevity and recall involve a shift toward simplicity, eating foods that are easily digested, rich in vital nutrients, and consumed in moderation. This nutritional approach is not just about calories, but about the energy cost of digestion. When an individual overeats, a significant amount of the body's qi is diverted to the stomach to process the load, leaving the brain deprived of the resources it needs to maintain alertness and encode memories. The feeling of the food coma is a mild form of the cognitive shutdown that occurs chronically in those with poor dietary habits. By adopting a diet that emphasizes lightness, steamed vegetables, lean proteins, and complex grains, and by stopping before the point of fullness, the practitioner preserves energy for the mind. This biological lightness translates into a psychological feeling of clarity. The brain is no longer fighting through a haze of blood sugar spikes and crashes, but is supported by a steady, clean supply of fuel. Equally critical, and often neglected, is the role of deep, restorative rest. In the Shaolin tradition, rest is not merely the cessation of activity, but a profound state of recovery, where the internal batteries are recharged. Scientifically, this aligns with the function of the glymphatic system, a waste clearance pathway in the brain that is primarily active during deep sleep. This system flushes out the neurotoxins, such as beta-amyloid, that accumulate during waking hours. For someone over 70, sleep patterns often become fragmented, disrupting this cleaning process. The result is a brain that is literally dirty with metabolic waste, making memory retrieval difficult. Prioritizing sleep hygiene, darkness, coolness, and a quiet mind before bed is a non-negotiable pillar of cognitive health. It is during these hours of silence that the brain consolidates the memories of the day, moving them from short-term holding to long-term storage. A practical reflection on this topic involves the concept of fasting from sensory input. Just as the gut needs a break from food, the brain needs a break from stimulation. The modern environment provides a relentless stream of noise, lights, and demands. Taking time each day to sit in absolute silence, with no television, radio, or conversation, allows the brain's background processing to settle. This silence is nutritious. It allows the sediment in a glass of water to settle to the bottom, leaving the water clear. A scenario might involve a digital sunset, where all screens are turned off 2 hours before sleep, replaced by a routine of gentle tea, drinking, or reflection. This signals to the body that the time for output has ended and the time for internal repair has begun. There are, of course, medical limitations to consider. Some individuals may battle insomnia due to medication or chronic pain, making the ideal of 8 hours of sleep difficult to attain. Others may have dietary restrictions that limit their choices. In these cases, the principle of rest must be adapted. If sleep is broken, then non-sleep deep rest, NSDR, or yoga nidra practices can provide similar restorative benefits during the day. If diet is restricted, the focus shifts to hydration and the timing of meals to ensure digestion does not interfere with sleep. The objective is to work with the body's current reality to reduce the burden on the system. It is about removing the friction that prevents the machine from running smoothly. The synergy between diet and rest creates a biological environment of safety. When the body is well-nourished and well-rested, the brain perceives that it is safe to expend energy on higher-order functions like creativity and memory. When it is exhausted and inflamed, it reverts to survival mode, prioritizing basic autonomic functions over cognitive sharpness. The practitioner treats their body with the reverence of a master craftsman caring for their primary tool. They understand that a sharp memory is not an isolated trick, but the natural flowering of a healthy, well-tended organism. The clarity of the mind is directly proportional to the purity of the inputs and the quality of the recovery. What clutter am I feeding my mind that prevents it from resting? The discipline of integration and self-mastery, the journey to building a sharp, reliable memory over 70, is ultimately a path of integration, where the boundaries between physical health, mental discipline, and daily habits dissolve into a single, unified lifestyle. It is a rejection of the fragmented approach where one does brain games for 10 minutes and then spends the rest of the day in a state of sedentary distraction. The philosophy championed by figures like Heng asks for a total commitment to self-mastery, regardless of age. It posits that the human potential for growth does not expire at a certain birthday. The brain is neuroplastic until the very end, constantly rewiring itself in response to the demands placed upon it. If the demand is for clarity, focus, and vitality, the brain will restructure itself to meet that demand. This conclusion brings the realization that the common enemy identified at the start, the belief in inevitable decline, is an internal barrier, not an external truth. While the body may age, the spirit and the mind can refine. The sharpness of memory is the result of a life lived with intention. It is the byproduct of a body that moves with flow, a mind that focuses with laser-like precision, and a lifestyle that honors the cycles of activity and rest. The roadmap provided is not a rigid set of rules, but a flexible framework of principles. Move the chi, clear the hindrances, nourish the vessel. Each day offers a new opportunity to practice these principles, to catch the mind wandering and bring it back, to choose the apple over the cake, to choose the walk over the chair. The path requires a shift in identity. The individual stops viewing themselves as an aging person and starts viewing themselves as a cultivator of life. This shift in perspective is powerful. It changes the internal dialogue from one of loss to one of maintenance and improvement. The memory lapses that do occur are no longer catastrophes, but signals, reminders to breathe, to slow down, to pay attention. The fear of the future is replaced by a confidence in the practitioner's ability to handle whatever comes with grace and clarity. The discipline becomes a source of joy, a way of honoring the gift of life and consciousness. In the end, a sharp memory is more than just recalling names or dates. It is the ability to be fully present for the people and experiences that matter. It is the capacity to hold the story of one's life together with coherence and meaning. By following the path of self-cultivation, the individual ensures that their later years are not defined by what is forgotten, but by the vividness of what is experienced and remembered. The dust is wiped from the mirror, the water is stilled, and the reflection remains true. The power to build this reality lies in the hands of the practitioner, in the simple, repetitive choices made every single day. What is the one promise I will keep to myself starting today?